Thank you, Chairman Biggs, Ranking Member McBath, and Ranking Member Raskin, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for having me. I've spent 25 plus years working in the federal criminal justice system and over 15 years warning that the justice system is a powder keg waiting to blow. Let me get straight to the point. Overcriminalization is a real and growing threat to our justice system, to the rule of law, and to individual freedom in this country. Overcriminalization happens when the government creates too many laws most Americans don't know even exist. We don't know, as many have stated, we don't know the number. I'm encouraged by Professor Turley's comments that we may eventually know that number. It's not justice as it currently stands, it's chaos disguised as law. Let me give you an example, one that I learned of on Instagram, of Charles and Heather Maud. When I saw their story, I reached out and volunteered to represent them pro bono. They are a South Dakota ranching family. Under the Biden DOJ, they were charged with federal crimes over a land dispute involving a fence on property that had been in their family for over 100 years. They were threatened not only with prosecution, but they were indicted and then told that they should seek alternatives to raising their two minor children, Lyle and Kennedy. I was honored to fight on their behalf, and last week we announced the dismissal of the criminal case against them. It's the kind of abusive prosecution that we see all too often in our justice system. With the help of the Attorney General Bondi and the Secretary of the Agriculture, Brooke Rollins, these charges were dropped for this family, but it should not have ever happened, and it shouldn't take those at the highest levels having to review what's being done by those with this power for ultimately justice to be applied. This isn't how a free nation should operate. We are punishing people who make mistakes, not criminals, not violent offenders, just people who happen to run afoul often of laws that they don't understand or they don't know. We incarcerate indiscriminately, and it's not making us safer. Nearly half of federal inmates are nonviolent drug offenders, and our prisons are beyond capacity. To add fuel to the fire, hundreds of thousands of Americans remain on some kind of community supervision for many years after their release, far beyond what studies have shown reduce recidivism. It's estimated $500 million and burdens on parole officers' valuable time are required now to monitor nonviolent offenders. That's why the Safer Supervision Act must be reintroduced to streamline and simplify federal supervision. It's just one tool to address overcriminalization. In addition, prosecutors have too much discretion, too little restraint, and virtually no oversight. I've been a prosecutor. I know how important those tools are to catch true criminals, but without constitutional checks like mens rea, the intent to commit a crime, we risk punishing innocent Americans for actions they didn't even know were illegal. Adding to their unsettling perception of unbridled power is the use of civil asset forfeiture, an abusive and unconstitutional way to take citizens' property without ever securing a criminal conviction. That's why I support Chairman Biggs' Mens Rea Reform Act and the FAIR Act, which restores the basic principle that intent matters. The administrative state is another part of the problem. Unelected bureaucrats are creating tens of thousands of new rules and regulatory crimes every year, 75 to 1 compared to Congress. And most of those rules are made by people who you didn't vote for and cannot hold accountable. That's why I also support Representative Chip Roy's Count the Crimes to Cut Act. It's simple. We need to know what crimes are on the books and who's enforcing them. Let's audit this system. It's common sense, and it's required if we want a constitutional rule of law in our justice system. We cannot ignore the role of some judges are playing. When judges pick winners and losers based on politics, not law, they erode the trust in the entire system. Recent rulings on deportation, election integrity, and sanctuary cities are just latest examples. But this issue is bipartisan. Democrats have also tried to pack courts when decisions don't go their way. In short, overcriminalization fuels lawfare, undermines our Constitution, and strips Americans of their rights and dignity. It leads to over-incarceration, abuse of prosecutorial discretion, runaway regulation, and judicial activism.
Mr. Tolman, how does the investigation of minor crimes reduce the effectiveness of law enforcement personnel and prevent them from addressing violent crimes? You kind of touched upon it a little bit earlier, so if you could spend a little bit more time telling us about that.
Yeah, we are not using our resources for the most important crimes, the crimes in which we need to be afraid of an individual rather than just mad at an individual for what they did. It's ironic that the one particular AUSA was referred to by Mr. Fox earlier. I actually had a case against him, and it was an individual who owned an aquarium that brought in the wrong type of fish and was saddled with a federal felony. Did not know that he brought in the wrong type of fish, and the paperwork was one of the issues. That happens every day in this country. We can talk about the crimes that are not being, that we laugh at. Many of those crimes are being used by bureaucrat prosecutors. I'm very proud of the work that I did, but the number of cases that I wish were actually aimed at the violent individuals in our communities. We've stopped working and being part of gang task forces across this country. We've limited the use of the federal resources on sex trafficking and human trafficking. We've got to get back to being good partners to our state police and law enforcement officers who have the primary responsibility on violent crime.
And then also, can you kind of explain how statutes that were meant to target our kingpins, like you just said, violent crime, like the mandatory minimum drug statutes that we have yet to meaningfully reform, that's easy for me to say, how they end up sweeping in the low-level offenders?
Well, absolutely. We are in a really backwards system right now. We are using oftentimes higher level individuals in a drug distribution ring to cooperate and get credit against lower level individuals. I prosecuted many drug cases, and we rarely ever were able to get intel on the upper levels and actually take down drug conspiracy rings. Instead, we utilized what we could in order to get low-level individuals who simply did not have the knowledge, and we didn't take the time or the patience because we didn't have the resources to investigate those conspiracies and those drug rings and cartels properly.
Mr. Tolman, I know in your written testimony you mentioned the Safer Supervision Act, which actually discusses the intersection between community safety and successful reintegration. Briefly, if you would, tell us why you believe those types of reforms to the supervised release system are important.
Yeah, just real quickly, the states are leading on this. Conservative states are doing amazing things on this. They've realized that if we have them on supervision for a year, maybe 18 months at most, they are incentivized, they do what they're supposed to, they get on with their life. In the federal system, the average is almost 5 years of supervision.
Mr. Tolman, let me ask you a question. Your name was familiar to me, so I Googled it for a long time, and I didn't find any Tolmans that I would have known of. Most of them were scientists and brilliant people like you, but there was a Tolman Hall at Vanderbilt, and I think that's where it came back. Do you know Tolman Hall?
I do know the family. I tried to get into Vanderbilt Law School and was not admitted.
It's a good school, and I'm sure
yes.
it doesn't mean anything, but it's a good school. Overcriminalization, that's a lot of that is federal Congress people looking for an issue du jour and passing laws that probably should be state laws. Is that not correct?
I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah, years ago when I was a state senator, there was a group of Congress people that came down to Nashville and all talked about carjacking, and they wanted to make it a federal law, and I suggested that it was more of a state responsibility. And they passed it, some federal law up here. And now, I don't know what it was. I've read somewhere there's a new carjacking law being proposed, I think by Senator Blackburn, and it changes the duty. I mean, the standard that right now you have to have an intent to murder or kill or do great injury to be a federal crime, and now they're reducing it to being, I forget what it is. Do you know what the difference is in this proposed law and the law that exists now?
I have seen that. I think the current carjacking law is an inappropriate federal law. It should be the states. It is their primary role to enforce those laws. And sadly, the carjacking, and I would also say the Hobbs Act cases, which is in essence now the robbery of a Kentucky Fried Chicken, for example. I mean, this is an example of the headline of the day driving the lawmaking and expanding the federal code.
Mr. Tolman, I'll go to you.
And one thing to keep in mind about the 300,000 plus regulations that have criminal penalties, almost all of those are white collar crime. So you're targeting you have the largest section of your criminal laws are actually targeting those that most likely have no criminal intent. And that's why we're seeing such ability of prosecutors without any proper accountability to use that against everyday citizens that don't have criminal intent.
So back to the mens rea for at least that.
Or at least that.
Yeah, that would make sense.